being that summer is coming up and a lot of people are trying to get quote unquote shredded for summer.
Yep.
They're trying to decrease body fat while maintaining muscle mass, and for the athletes listening, strength and power and speed. Being that, so it's true that calories in influence calories out. When dieting for summer, would it be a better idea to start with much higher calories and then diet from there, as opposed to just cutting 1,500 calories right away and going low because you think that's going to help you lose more weight by just being in a larger deficit? Is it smarter to start higher and then cut slowly?
Yeah, I think that is true.
So what would you do? Let me redo my question. If you had, let's say, a 20-year-old college athlete, we'll say Division II basketball player.
Yep.
I know there's somebody out there listening
Absolutely.
who's in those shoes. And it's the off season. He gained a little bit of body fat. Now he wants to cut down. We'll even say he's willing to count his macros. What would you have him do? Where do you start with somebody like that?
Yeah, that's a perfect setup. And so there's a couple factors we want to think about. One, we know as soon as we start to restrict, the body starts to catch on. And we also know that the bigger the restriction, the faster the body catches on. And so what I'd encourage people to do
That's
is
very important to know.
That's important because you're on a time clock, but it's also to say that you have the ability to manipulate when the clock starts. And so what I like to say is there's a big difference between shortchanging the drawer and robbing the bank. One of those is going to get the police called a whole lot quicker.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're not trying to rob the bank. The other thing we got to think about, though, is what we call the bioenergetics of this person you're talking about, the energy use of this person. Our body burns carbs, fats, and protein as energy. Protein is only what it uses if it's desperate. So most of us aren't walking around burning on protein. 2% of our body uses protein for energy. The majority, the lion's share, is a combo of carbs and fat. Muscles use carbs dominantly, some fat. Brain uses carbs. And so the more active a person is, the more need for carbohydrates for optimum performance. So if you get an athlete that does keto, they're going to crash real hard. Right. Or there's going to at least be a period of crash until they get into that ketosis. But if you have an explosive athlete, you don't want to put them in ketosis because ketosis prevents that anaerobic threshold, which is the maximum, like the 100% effort stuff, explosive jumps, sprints. When you're in keto, you only get 90% of your max of anything. And so if you're a basketball player, you shouldn't even consider a low carb diet. It's not even on the table.
That's very important. I got a lot of questions on Instagram about that.
Perfect. And that's why, is because even when you're fueling with fat, your body cannot use fat in an anaerobic state. Anaerobic meaning high intensity, max effort stuff goes away. And so all of your maxes go down 10%. If you're an endurance athlete running at 70% effort for a marathon, you can use keto because you're not tapping into those sprinter. You're not trying to be Usain Bolt out there. But if you're trying to dunk, if you're trying to slam it, if you're trying to sprint back to play defense, if you want to have any sort of vertical, you need carbohydrates. And so we've got to think about it this way. So I can sit here and I can say, okay, great. I'll do all the math, right? I'll give some just like rough examples. We don't got to go completely nerd on it. But we can measure out this person's deficit. We know we don't want to starve them because it's going to activate starvation mechanisms. And we also know that they're very active, which is to say that their muscles are tearing. And we want to make sure that doesn't just like stop repairing, right? And we know that their body, when they're exercising, uses a lot of carbs. So does their brain. So what happens is a lot of people cut carbs real hard. Well, this is what happens. Your muscles use those carbs regardless. And then your brain goes, hey, I need carbs. And then people start talking about they're craving carbs real bad. They're craving sugar real bad. They're hungry all the time. They're ravenous all the time. Well, that's because their brain uses carbohydrates and they spend it on the basketball court. And so we can't afford to give them too little carbohydrate. Our body only has so much carbohydrate stores, right? Those are very limited. A little bit in the liver, a little bit in the muscle in case a tiger comes and we need to run away. In the liver to keep our blood sugar stable while we're sleeping so we don't go into a coma while we sleep. That's basically the carb stores we have. We've got fat stores for days. And so what we got to think about is the game when you're an athletic, fit person It's actually keep protein high to allow for recovery, keep carbohydrates high to account for brain's use of carbs and exercise use of carbs, and then keep fats as tight as possible. There's a point at which your fats go so low that your joints start to ache and all that, because fats have a role in the physical and functional aspects of our body. So there is a threshold, but here's where we get to. We get to a point where if we know that I need to give someone maximum protein for recovery, I need to give them every gram of carb they burn from exercise back, which I could sit down and do in depth, right? Oh, okay, you did an hour and a half basketball. You were at an average heart rate of 160. You burned 1,000 calories. 80% of it was carbs. So that's 800 calories. That's 200 grams of carbs. Great. Brain uses 130. Calories burned from exercise, 200 carb. That's 330. We need a little extra spillover. Let's give you 350 grams of carbs. Let's give you 200 protein. What kind of deficit can we create from the fats? Well, we know that if you go below 50 grams as a guy, you're going to really start to ache and be sore. So that is what we'd call our minimum caloric, right? That's the lowest we can go while setting you up to thrive. And so just for fun, 350 carb, that's 1,400 calories from carbs, 800 from protein. That's 2,500, right? Wait, no. What was it? 350, 700, 1,400 plus 800, 2,200. Apologies. And then 50 grams of fat. That'd be like 2,650. And so I'd look at that dude and go, okay, cool. You're burning 3,300. The least we can give you is 2,650. That's going to be 1.5 pounds a week. That's the fastest that person can lose weight. Right. And so people get so caught up in trying to set records of how fast they lose. That is the stupidest thing you can pay attention to. Because one, if you go fast, you're going to shortchange. Basically, you're going to rob the bank. You're going to starve yourself. Your body's going to rebound hard. Then you're going to overeat on the other side. Your body's going to pour the fat back on in the wrong places. It creates resistance the next time around. And then when you're 55 years old, all of a sudden you can't lose anymore. And you get a bunch of people that spent their life yo-yoing. And so one, that's a reason not to do it. But the other part is, not to mention when you're training, injuries, and all of that other stuff. When you starve yourself, again, your body has to stop doing things. One of the first things it can't do is build new muscle. So people go into this cut and then they go and train like they're trying to build. The body goes from tear, repair to tear, inflame. And then they get injured and all of that. And so it's to say to put yourself at a crazy deficit's a bad idea. When people focus on rate of weight loss, they focus on the wrong thing. They also get obsessed with, instead of rate of fat loss, which is, again, getting shredded, is having muscle tissue, having low enough body fat. And then the muscle tissue, though, your muscles are almost all water and carbs. So when you're carb depleted, your muscles look flat. They're like water balloons that are half full. You need carbs. That's why bodybuilders carb up on the day of a show. The muscles get nice and full. They pull water in, and the muscles swell up like big, dense water balloons. They look real tight. And so we've got to think about it as, okay, rate of weight loss is going to screw you. So you've got to make sure you fall out of love with how fast you can lose, because if you obsess with rate of weight loss, that's why people go keto. They'll cut carbs and your body holds, 6 to 8 pounds of carbs and water. So you get this quick 8 off, but it's not fat mass lost. So if you got a dude that's really active, trying to get shredded for summer, right? The comment is, we need to give them enough carbs for exercise and for brain. We need to give them enough protein for recovery. We need to give them that base amount of fat just for like function purposes, and recognize that their deficit is whatever that other part of that fat was. It's not going to be this fast, aggressive thing. It's going to be pound and a half a week of fat at most. If you're losing more than 1.5 pounds, it's probably not fat mass, or you're ravenous, one or the other. But what's cool is that look is going to look really different, because the only thing coming off is body fat. The muscles are going to stay full. They're going to stay tight. They're going to recover well. They're going to help manage inflammation well. So it's kind of funny when you start to realize we live in a society obsessed with low carb dieting. Athletes need to be actually moderating their fat more than their carbs. But once again, the average American is inactive. And so low carb dieting isn't talking to the 22-year-old basketball player, right? It's talking to the average American, the 45-year-old morbidly obese person that gets 2,000 steps a day, doesn't exercise, consumes fast food 8 times a week, drinks 4 liters of soda every week, right? Like that's the general information that's out there is talking to the majority. And unfortunately, athletes and fit people aren't the majority. Like 18% of adults exercise regularly in the US.
Right.
Being active is the minority. For you fit people out there that are trying to, or I'll say active people out there that are trying to get leaner, do not get rid of the carbs.
Okay, great. That's a lot there. So
Yeah.
keep the carbs. We need enough protein for recovery. So I have a couple questions. Number one, what is enough protein for recovery? How many grams per pound of body weight, or any way that you like to explain it to people? And then if fats are what we should be moderating as an athlete, do we start those a little higher, and then as the diet goes on, start to dwindle those down? You said don't go below 50 if you're a male. Mm-hmm. So where should we start? Should we start at 90, 80? Does it depend on body weight? So just how many grams of protein is enough for recovery, and then where should we start with our fats?
Those are great questions. So protein-wise, we're looking at, easiest way to tell you is 0.7 grams per pound. Everyone always says a gram per pound. That's way more than you need.
I'm guilty of that. So
yeah, the gram per pound is an easy rule of thumb because it's easy to think of.
Right.
From an actual muscle recovery perspective, 0.7 grams per pound is plenty. Anything beyond that is just helping you stay full. And you have to ask the question at that point, would it be better off as carbs that actually give you energy? And so we'll call it the 0.7 to 1. If you ever go over a gram per pound, and you're not on performance enhancing drugs, like you're not on PEDs, you are absolutely wasting protein that should be carbohydrate at that point. But 0.7 to 1, that range is going to be, all of it's going to create the same muscle recovery, but the higher up you go, the more full you'll feel. There's pros and cons to that, obviously. From the where to start and where to go, here's a way to think about it. Being at a deficit is never ideal at all. You can't be in a deficit long term. The less often you're there, the better. The longer you're in it, the more your body catches on. And so a way to say it is, if I'm working with an athlete and I've got the time, I'm not actually giving them a daily deficit. I'm a really big fan of what I like to call the fuel feast fast, or fuel fast feast, which is we look at their training days and we actually don't give them a deficit on those days. They walk into training days fueling at caloric maintenance. They walk in with the intention of using, abusing, and challenging muscle, knowing that there's the nutrition to recover. And then on their off days, we create basically what we call a fast feast pattern, which is I'll help them use a caloric deficit using like a fasting protocol, 2 big meals a day for those days, just as an example. There's debate over the advantages of the fasting part. To be honest, it's just more of the practicality. A way to think about it is they're hitting the workouts in the gym Monday through Friday. They're training. They're recovering really well. They're not at caloric deficit. And then on Saturday and Sunday, they get 2 1,000 calorie meals. And those meals, I mean, that's a Chipotle burrito, right? It's easy to go out to a restaurant for brunch and get 1,000 calories. It's easy to go out to dinner and have 1,000 calories. It gives you the ability to live, but a 2,000 calorie intake on an off day for most fit people is going to be a deficit. And what's cool, so you get 2 days at a deficit, right back up to fueling, metabolism back up. And so what ends up happening is, instead of that idea of constant deficit, where for ease, you're burning 3,300, you eat 28, within 6 months, you're burning 28. Well, if you're burning 3,300 and you're eating 2,000 twice a week and 3,300 5 times a week, 6 months later, you're still burning 3,300. And so we can create a metabolic preservation through infrequent deficits. Now you can hear where we're only creating a deficit twice a week there. We're not going to be losing record-setting pace of fat loss, but you're going to be losing pure fat. You're going to be feeling fantastic. You're not going to be falling behind on inflammation and recovery. You're going to be setting PRs in the gym. You're going to be performing in your games. And so when I work with an athlete, I don't ever put them in a constant deficit. It is one of the stupidest things you can do. You're just setting them up to abandon muscle recovery.
I think that's what 99% of people who diet do.
Oh, absolutely. It's the norm. It's just calories in, it goes back to the conversation we just had. Because of the very basic understanding of calories in, calories out, it's, oh, cool, I burned 33, I'm going to eat 28, I'm going to lose a pound a week. But you start to realize that doesn't happen. And it's because you either get too hungry because the deficit is your body not being able to recover. You go to a basketball game, you play on the court for 3.5 hours one night, you're hungry as heck, and you eat a bowl of cereal and it spikes and you get hungry and you black out for a sec and then you wake up and there's a box gone, right? Like, we can all relate to that. If you've ever been athlete hungry, say I, right? Like, that's your body being human. And it's really dumb that we blame our willpower in that moment. It's like, no, you're just not hacking your body right. You're trying to starve yourself, right? You're trying to do things that are performance based with a hand behind your back, right? We've got to let these two things coexist. If we're going to try and change comp, that is a separate goal from performing. And so you have two choices. You either give up performance or compartmentalize them. And that's where most athletes have days where they're off. Well, use those days, create those days. And I think a lot of people like check into this concept because it's fun. Like you have the days where you're fueling to perform, and then you have the days where you're fueling to comp. And it gives those off days purpose, because I know a lot of athletes struggle to take an off day because they don't feel like there's a benefit. Well, if the benefit is to relax, rehydrate, and comp, now all of a sudden you've got this fasting protocol, right? You start to hear where it's like, oh, this just like feels good. It becomes routine. It clicks better. I feel like these days are purposeful. They're motivating. I'm excited about them. And then they're paired with days that I'm really excited about because I get to keep doing what I'm doing. So there's a lot of practical element to it. There's a lot of hormonal benefit. And like you said, it kind of helps us see that most people calorie in, calorie out, drop the calorie in, increase the calorie out. That's a huge disservice, and it can't be done long term, and that's why people struggle with that consistency. So let's not do it as long term.
So I want you to know that I personally, as much as I feel like I do know about nutrition, I have never heard that.
It's incredible, right?
I mean, I've been doing performance in health and physical education for a while now, and I have never heard that. And I'm currently cutting for summer, and I'm doing exactly what you're saying not to do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to switch, immediately, effective tomorrow. And what I want to say to all the athletes out there is that I preach that you have to have high-intensity days and low-intensity days. You cannot have high-intensity days every single day, which, most athletes, and especially basketball players, they love to have high-intensity days every day. And my high school athletes, I coach a high school team. Yep. We have an AAU team. So just this weekend, we had about 6 games in an AAU tournament. And then everybody's all fired up for the tournament. And then Monday comes, and they're like, well, we want to do, a heavy leg workout and then a skill session. And then Tuesday, they want to do an upper body workout and a skill session. And the skill sessions are always like, we say we're just going to shoot around, and then it ends up being very high intensity.
Of course.
So every day for these guys end up being high intensity. And you cannot do that to recover enough to perform optimally. So what I want everybody out there to know is that when I'm preaching high intensity days and low intensity days, what you just explained fits perfectly with that.
Yes.
Because on your high intensity days, now you can fuel up for performance. And then on your lower intensity days where you're recovering and you're rehydrating and now you're comping, now you can do exactly what you just said and do the fast window and then fuel with 2 meals. So exactly. I'm personally going to use that, and I hope a lot of people out there.
It's the only way to do it, and a way to think about it, man. I mean, LeBron James doesn't comp in the season, right? There was a couple years ago where he dropped like 20 pounds, but he did it when? In the off season.
Right.
And it's because in the main season, they are performing every day, but that's for a short iterative section of the year, right? And they know he's not walking around at a calorie deficit, but guess what? Why is he 6% body fat? Well, because he exercises like crazy, right? And that's the thing to keep in mind is the more active you are, the more naturally lean you can be because of how the hormonal aspects of exercise affect really your body's willingness to burn stuff. But for us out there that are trying to sort of do 2 things at once, you start to realize the mistake is trying to do both every day. You need to find a way to compartmentalize, and sometimes that looks like having a part of the season that's less intense, and then you can comp a bit more consistently. Or during a season where you're hitting it hard, or if you've got programming where you're hitting it hard, we've got to find that if you're going to try and do both, you got to give yourself a chance to do both. And I guarantee you're going to love it. You're going to thrive because you'll start to. Again, it's what we just talked about. When you go onto a high-intensity day where you're burning a ton of carbohydrates and then you're trying to diet, you're holding your breath at that point. You're not going to feel good. You're not going to recover well. You're setting yourself up to crash. You can't perform with a caloric deficit. Those 2 things they just don't coexist. Your body can't tap into fat stores to help you explosively jump and throw a ball down. Like that just doesn't happen. Your body needs those carbs. So we got to make sure you're fueling adequately for performance. But there are days built into most well-programmed athletes' protocols that allow them some days to comp. And it may not set records on fat loss, so it might not be the 3-week shred that they sell on the internet, which sounds real sexy and exciting until you realize it sucks, you crash, and it actually has some serious consequences. But what's fun is what I just explained to you is how you can stay lean year round. I mean, it's actually not that hard to tap into that, right? If you and I did your math, I bet the 3,300 is not far off, to be honest, just because of your frame. But like 5 days a week, 3,300 calories, good carbohydrates, good protein, good fueling protocols. And then on the weekends, when you and the girlfriend are out and about, you do a brunch dinner, 1,000 calories each, right? Go get some French toast somewhere, drink a Fairlife protein drink with it, and then dinner. Go get a burrito or go get a burger or go get some pizza and some wings. I mean, like you can fit 1,000 calories. That's a lot of different foods. You won't even feel like you're cutting. She won't even notice you're cutting. It won't be that miserable chicken and broccoli bodybuilder BS that's out there, right? Where you think you just need to hold your breath and deprive yourself of fun. You start to realize, oh, you mean I can actually like live while I do this? Yeah, get lean, get strong, stay strong, right? Let's hack this.
Okay, so do you are 2 days a week? So 5 and 2, is that what you recommend?
Yeah, it's funny. I'll say this again. Less is more. At the end of the day, your body does not like to be at a deficit. The less you do it, the more sensitive your body will be to it. Doing it 4 days of, fueling 3 days, that's probably kind of like the max. 5-2 is just a sweet spot. It feels good. Most people's programs 5 days. Most people need 2 days off, if we're being honest. So I find a 5-2 protocol is a really good balance. But what's cool is you can manipulate this based on where you're at, right? If you're trying to, going back to your original question, which is like, where would you start people? Well, to be honest, if I'm working with an athlete, they're coming off of a season where they've been fueling and we've reverse dieted them up and they're just like burning like crazy, right? They are eating, they are fueling, they're only fueling. And then we take them from that state of only fueling to 2 days of comping and they melt body fat because they're coming from a metabolic high ground, but then they preserve that metabolic high ground because then they have 5 days where they're right back at it. They don't ever shortchange themselves. And so if they're in a properly fueled state, it makes that fasting, right, that fat loss state so much more sensitive. And we can compare that not just to athletes, but Gen Pop. One of the problems we have is people have been restricting so long that because most people walk around in a constant attempt at a caloric deficit, right? Most people's metabolisms are operating suboptimally. And so they come into my office, right? And they swear they've been eating 1,400 calories a day and they're not losing weight. It's like, well, and they're like, but I thought it was calories in, calories out. And it's like, it is calories in, calories out. Your calories in is 1,400. Your calories out is 1,400. Why is it 1,400? Well, how often do you have to get your hair cut, fingernails, right? All these little things. You're probably on antidepressants because you've been under eating so long, your body's made serotonin crash to try and put you to sleep. You feel lethargic, so you don't exercise because you just can't, right? We start to realize like these are all metabolic conservations. And so it's to say that problem one, you're eating too little. And I then have to reverse diet those people. Sometimes that takes 6 months, right? Feed them gradually more and more and more and more so that they have a metabolism that we can then put to work. But for all those athletes out there that hopefully already have that metabolism, or if it's a younger pop that hasn't subjected themselves to absurd dieting tendencies for decades on end, know that you being lean doesn't come from you starving. It actually comes from you fueling and feasting intelligently.
Right. I love that. So for everybody out there who is wondering now, how do I find my numbers for this 5 and 2 protocol? How do they find their numbers? Do they go with the 0.7 grams per pound of body weight of protein? And then, like, how do they find their protein, fats, and carbs? Let's say a 150-pound guy versus a 200-pound guy. Yeah. Where do they start? So that everyone out there listening can actually find what to do if they want to do this.
Yeah, and I'll say that the most accurate way is going to be to get their body fat done and actually have someone do it. I will just preface that. That's kind of what someone on my team does well, right? But if you're out there and you're just trying to crunch some numbers, we need to get basically first, we need to estimate what your calorie out is. Going back to when I said before, when we calculate all that math, right? We take your lean mass, we plug it into the Cunningham equation. If we know how much fat-free mass you have, we can plug it into what's called the Cunningham equation. It tells you what your basal metabolic rate is. That's how many calories you burn just laying on a couch completely still for 24 hours, being alive. We then calculate your activity burn. And so for someone out there, you could go online, you could look up like the Harris-Benedict equation is the most common calorie equation that's out there. Calculate that. That's your BMR. You don't have the body fat one, so it's not quite as accurate, but it serves the purpose. And then if you have an Apple Watch or if you use some sort of Fitbit or something that tells you how many calories you're burning, once again, not quite as accurate as if I was going to calculate METs values and really go in and like dig in on how much you're burning. But if you have a Whoop strap, those are actually really accurate. I will say that. A shout out to Whoop for that. We get an idea of how much you're burning. That gives us your total caloric output. That is calories out, assuming calories in. So that's what we call your potential calorie out, right? Your body wants to burn that. It wants to use that. It wants to do that if you give it enough fuel to do that. That's going to set it up to thrive. When we have that, from there, we start with the protein. That's the easiest one. You do 0.7 to 1 grams per kilogram, grams per pound, I apologize. 0.7 to 1 grams per pound body weight. That's going to be your protein range. Let's just say for fun that we calculate you out and you're burning 3,000 calories, right? Protein is 4 calories per gram. So if you do the math, you said 150 pound person, we'd go 0.7 of 150 is 105, I think, by quick math. So we'd say it's between 105 and 150 grams. 105 times 4 is 420 calories. 150 times 4 is 600 calories. So we're saying of that 3,400 to 600 of it's protein. From there, we would basically say, hey, let's control the fats. And so rough rule of thumb, 50 to 60 grams of fat. That's going to be for a guy that's, young, fit, athletic. It's going to be about as low fat as we want to go so we don't dry joints out long term.
And they can start there?
They can start there.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I'm hoping these people are already fueling real well. And again, if they're not, then that needs to be a whole separate conversation. Go see a dietitian is what I'd say.
You're going to need to reverse back up.
You need to reverse back up. Yep. But we do the 50 grams of fat. That's 450 calories. So now we're saying of the 3,000, we had 600 from protein. We have 450 from fat. That's 1,050 of the 3,000. 2,000's left. 4 calories per gram of carbs. 2,000 divided by 4 is 500. It's a lot of carbohydrate. Right. Now, here's the comment. We can note, right, the 3,000 calorie burn. This is where we go, okay, so where do we create this deficit? And that's where I said before, in an ideal world, you have your fueling days, which what we just gave you there was potential fueling days. And then we have our fasting days where those can just be a little bit tighter. You don't need as much carbohydrate on those days. And so what we would do, though, is recognize that 3,000 example was based on your activity, right? We calculated how much you burn just to be alive and then how much you burn as an athlete. Well, on your off days, you're not doing the athlete part. And so for a guy your size, like your basal metabolic, you just laying on a couch is like 2,400 roughly, right? I'm like 2,250 just as like a rule of thumb. 150 pound dude's going to be 1,800 or 1,900. Once again, you can use the Harris-Benedict equation to calculate that for yourself. If you type in that online, it's pretty easy to find. It's like, and most of those like calorie calculators that are out there, that's what they start with. That's kind of the base one. So we'd look at it and we'd say, okay, cool. We're trying to have our day where we have our activity. So the Harris-Benedict calorie calculators are going to say, what's your activity factor? And then on the off days, it's just going to be your BMR. And we really want to focus on creating a deficit on those kind of BMR days, those active recovery days, the days where you're just walking around, lounging around, all that good stuff. But so I guess I'll pause and just kind of build it back up. So step one, we need to figure out how many calories you're burning on days and off days. That's the first thing. From the calorie, we can then break down the macros through what you just said. Calculate the protein, calculate the fats, the rest is carbs. That's kind of how you build that out.
Now, very quickly, could somebody, to find out how many calories they're burning, could someone out there right now just try to find their maintenance and consume, like on those activity days? I know activity is different every single day.
Yeah.
But could they say, hey, I'm going to try to eat 3,300 calories for the next 2 weeks and see if my weight stays the same?
Oh, absolutely.
And then they could use that to go off of?
To establish a maintenance. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that could be good. And then again, it's kind of fun because one of the things I'll point out too is, yes, we could try and micromanage this by macros, right? And I think macronutrients and tracking can be a useful thing to like kind of calibrate you. But to what you just said, I think there's actually more value in that, which is to say, if we have you maintaining, what stops you from continuing eating that way 5 days a week? And then 2 days, track. Right.
Right.
Focus on the comp days as the only days you track. Let the 5 days of fueling be a little bit intuitive. Make sure you're getting good protein and good carbs. Right. But like you said, if you're maintaining and feeling good, let that be your base, and then have 2 days, your off days, where you comp it down. And we know that there's going to be a drop in fats. We know those days because you're less active, there's a drop in carbs. But what's kind of fun is if you track the calories, if you focus on 2,000, just as an easy example, 2 days a week, and you've got fueling days elsewhere, it becomes a little bit less concerning because the deficit isn't this like long-term extended state. You're basically dipping down to tap into fat reserves periodically, which is to say, part of the reason I like this is because it doesn't have to be as exact. We don't have to jump through all these hoops and have macros on this day, macros on this day. We can set it up so it's, hey, you got a good fueling pattern on these days. And then these 2 days, let's just dial it in, 2 meals, make sure it's under 1,000 calories, make sure there's a protein and a produce, and go from there, right? Just let it kind of be. And because you tap into it, it's a little bit more, that way it's a little bit more intuitive, it's a little less strenuous, and you will absolutely see the results. So.
Right. Okay. I love that. And that was a lot of information that came off of one true or false question.
That was one true or false question. Oh man.
Look at all my notes.
Oh, we got 3 more hours here, guys. So buckle up.
All those